Hi there, I thought I would make a video about something I've been thinking about. So there's this very common anti-map argument, which I call appeal to normal. And this video is essentially my effort to analyze that argument, to deconstruct it, and to basically explain why I think it's not convincing, why I think it's quite piss poor in fact. You could encounter this appeal to normal argument also in debates about homosexuality or transgenderism. It's the same proposition really, and it goes roughly like this. You are appealing to the supposed abnormality of, let's say, being map, and you are using that as a reason to not tolerate them, to be against efforts to destigmatize that, as a reason to discriminate against them. And I guess I could also mention that there are different variations to this argument, which I personally think are just different variations to the same proposition. So for example, someone could appeal to the idea that pedophilia is a deviance or perversion. These are also very common rhetorical strategies in these debates. But in my opinion, it's just the same argument. It just means abnormal. Because when we are talking about deviance, it's always deviance from the norm. And perversion is just a synonym for deviance. And they all three of them mean roughly the same. The signification is roughly the same. So I guess we have to start off by defining abnormal. And I think there's going to be no dispute about the fact that abnormal just means not normal. But what's going to be a bit trickier is to define normal. As far as I understand, there are at least 3 or 4 different senses to the word normal. But I'm going to limit my analysis to 2, what I think are the most common senses for the word normal. But it doesn't matter which definition you pick really, because it doesn't save the argument. It's going to be piss poor anyway. But I'm going to focus on what I think personally are the 2 most common definitions or senses to the word normal, and that's what we are going to discuss next. So what I regard as the most common sense for the word normal is something I call statistical normal. And I consider it the most common sense for the word is because that's just my experience, that when I pay attention to people when they use the word normal, I think this is what they usually mean, is this kind of a statistical sense of the word. So it's very easy to explain what this means. So basically, if something is usual, something is common, everyday-like, something is statistically probable, that's normal. If something is unusual, uncommon, something you wouldn't expect as the outcome, statistical anomaly, that would be abnormal. And even though you could apply the concept of normal to all kinds of things like circumstances and inanimate objects, I have limited my examples. I have few examples here. I have limited them to just character traits, because that's more to the point. That's more relevant to what we're discussing here, which is appeal to normal as an anti-map argument. So, for example, if you live in Poland, it would be normal that your skin color is white, because Poland is I think it's mostly all white country. It's very the ethnicity is not very diverse there. Okay. In Somalia, it would be the other way around. It would be normal to be black. It would be abnormal to be white. I mean, it's kind of simple stuff. You should be able to get this. If you have freckles, I mean, freckles, that's mostly, in most places of the world, I think, uncommon, which would make it abnormal in this sense of the word. If you are too tall, if you are too short, those are also abnormal traits. But again, it kind of depends on the geographical area. Like technically there could be some kind of a country or some kind of a village or some kind of a community where like 90% of people are very short, and then it would be actually normal to be short there. When it comes to illnesses and disorders, they are usually abnormal, because usually the most usual state of being is to have like a normal health, good health. That health deficits are abnormal. But if you get too old, like if you get to some kind of a very high age, then I guess it would be normal to have some kind of a health deficits, but that's more of an exception. Okay, so when it comes to like different sexual preferences, being gay, being or sexual identities, well, being gay and being transgender, obviously they would be abnormalities. Not because there's something wrong with them. I'm just saying that. I'm just saying that they are unusual. Like if you belong to a sexual minority, like by definition, that has to be abnormal because it's a minority. That's something you wouldn't expect. Okay. So the majority is like the normal types, and the minorities are always by definition abnormalities in this sense of the word. Okay. But you should now already see what's the problem with this whole argument where you are trying to make the case that if something is abnormal, it's a bad thing. We have to oppose them. We have to discriminate against them. And the problem is obviously that just because something is unusual or improbable doesn't mean it's a negative thing. Doesn't mean it's unethical. In fact, it doesn't even mean it's detrimental. For example, we could talk about Albert Einstein, who was abnormally intelligent, abnormally bright. But you wouldn't argue that because he was abnormal, he was a bad person, that we should have lynched him. No, you would understand that. I mean, sometimes it's good to be abnormal. So obviously, but however, if you are going to use this line of reasoning against, let's say, maps, you would have to be consistent. You would also have to disapprove of people who are left-handed, because being right-handed is the norm. It's most likely that you are right-handed than left-handed. So if you are against maps because they're abnormal, you would have to be against all these other traits that are abnormal as well. But if you are an anti, I don't see that you are too consistent here, because you don't seem to have a problem necessarily with people who are left-handed, with people who are black in Poland. I mean, if you lived in Poland, you would have to be a fucking racist cunt if you use this line of reasoning against maps. But anyway, I guess that's enough. I don't want to over-explain it. Let's go to the next sense of the word. Okay. Now, as the second most common sense for the word normal, I have what I call normative normal. I'm not quite happy about how that sounds, but I had to call it something, so it's normative normal. But these aren't official terms. I just wanted to call them something so that my ideas and thoughts are a bit more clear. So this is very easy to explain as well. So something is normal when it adheres or conforms to norms. And by norm, I mean social norms, not necessarily laws, but mostly just attitudes people have. Although in some cases, these norms might extend and become laws. If there is strong opposition against something, some kind of a behavior, then it might become just a law. And I have one example of that coming up. And abnormal would be exactly that, the opposite, when it's against the norms. People disapprove of that. They are against that kind of behavior. And this is one thing, by the way, which I learned when I did some reading, a little bit of reading about norms. Just very basic stuff. I just wanted to read something off the internet to have a little bit better idea of what the hell I'm even talking about. Is that like most scholars seem to define norms as attitudes relating to behavior. So basically, you could actually dismiss the whole appeal to normal argument just based on this. You could just point out that pedophilia is not behavior, so therefore it's not subject to this kind of an evaluation where we think it's either normal or abnormal, because those words in this sense of the word apply only to behavior. But however, I'm not going to even stress on that point, because I don't need to. This argument fails regardless. So I have basically just two main examples here, because these are great examples. They illustrate my points very well. Okay, so the first one is that in the past, slavery used to be okay. So it adhered to norms, and therefore it was normal. In the America before the civil wars, in Africa that used to trade in slaves. So slavery was normal in the past. Another example I have is homosexuality, which is strongly against the norms in Saudi Arabia, for example. And it's also, in fact, it's so against the norms that it's in fact illegal and harshly punished if you act on your gayness there. And I think these are great examples because they illustrate the 2 points I have here, which is that just because something is adheres to norms, like slavery in the past in many places of the world, doesn't mean it was ethical, doesn't mean it was a good thing, doesn't mean it was a good idea, okay? Just because it was approved by most people living there in that community. And conversely, just because something is against the norms, like homosexuality in Saudi Arabia, doesn't mean it's unethical, doesn't mean it's a bad thing, doesn't mean they should continue to discriminate gays there, just because it's against the norms there, which gets us to the next point I have, is that if you are going to use that reasoning, you are against behavior or you are against preferences because they are against the norms, well, it's very easy to see that that's actually a fallacy called appeal to majority, where you are arguing that because most people in certain area believe certain way, that has to be true, it has to be right. If most people are doing something lynching gays, and that's the fucking hobby they have, that's the popular sports they have to continue doing that. No, we can critique them for doing that, just like we can critique slavery, even though it was okay, and even that time it could have been critiqued as being unethical, because you wouldn't be as irrational as to say that, well, if you are in Sweden and you are gay, that's ethical, but if you go to Saudi Arabia, that somehow magically becomes unethical. That makes literally no sense. It's either ethical or it's not, and it's regardless of the laws. It's regardless of the norms people have. So another example could be a child marriage. I believe there are still countries in the world where child marriage is the norm, but you wouldn't say that therefore it's a good thing. Now, there are actually examples of things or behaviors that are against the norms that are bad. So I'm going to name one just to cover all these different options. So, for example, littering is something that's against the norms, but but most people still, like rational people, would still understand that it's a bad thing to litter. I'm saying you should punish it severely. I'm just saying that it's a bad thing, but it's not bad thing because it's against the norms. It's bad thing for some other reason, because if you litter, there's plastic that might end up in the beaks of birds. It might hurt the wildlife. They're like real rational reasons. The argument isn't that it's bad because it's against the norms, but because there's a victim. To summarize and wrap this up, appeal to normal as an argument against maps or gays or trans folks seems to fail, because if you're using the most common sense, the statistical sense, the problem is that just because something is unusual doesn't mean it's unethical or detrimental. If you're using the second sense, the normative sense, the problem is of similar nature. Just because something is against the norms doesn't mean you have shown that it's unethical or detrimental, or there's a victim somehow. And if you are insisting on that line of reasoning, you are essentially when you are appealing to norms, you are appealing to majority, which is a fallacy. You're not supposed to do that. So my hope is that if you encounter these arguments, where someone says that pedophilia is a perversion or homosexuality is a deviation and therefore bad thing, my hope is that you would consider linking this video to them or in that debate, because that might be an appropriate rebuttal in that context. That might be constructive to that discussion. Who knows? Just a thought. There's just going to be more videos coming up soon. I'm thinking of responding to this one Lauren Shen, at least. She's a conservative anti-pedo who's full of shit. So I definitely want to take a look at some of her claims. That's all I have. Thanks for listening.